This segment of Open Up is brought to you in part by Up Apr, the locally owned company that has everything you need for lush, weed-free gardens and lawns, from the smallest backyards to the property of the biggest businesses, and with top quality equipment and products better than the big chains, and they service what they sell. Located on Rosedale Highway, just east of Callaway, across from the promenade. Be loyal, buy local, upapr.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, that sentence is at the very core of the American way. That sentence, all men are created equal. That's a radical idea then. Did you know that President Abraham Lincoln is one of the most popular motivational speakers in the world? I'm Gene Greisman, professional speaker and author who portrays President Lincoln.
Wow. Yeah. Gene Greisman.
Yes, and we have him on the phone, Don. Gene, well, good afternoon where you are.
Yes, and how are you?
Oh, we're doing fine. Welcome to Open Up.
I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Gene, you and I have emailed one another over the years about various things. It's so good to actually have you on our show with us.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Gene, let's use that what you just said on our air here as a springboard. You know what, we really are a radical people when you look at what we have affirmed as our national creed. It threatened. It was like an earthquake, as I recall, in that era. Every dictator on their throne, every monarch on their throne trembled. Tell us about that, about our revolutionary heritage and how Lincoln really affirmed and advanced that revolution.
Well, actually, at the time that Abraham Lincoln became president, every other major nation on earth, as you said, was ruled by a monarch or a dictator or a military leader. And so it was revolutionary for a common man to come to the executive office, especially a common man like Lincoln, who had only 1 year of schooling and was raised on the frontier, was born with absolutely no political connections, and he becomes president. As a matter of fact, all of the great powers of earth were waiting for this experiment with people's government to collapse. They felt that it would soon disintegrate. As a matter of fact, Lincoln worked that idea into the Gettysburg Address when he concludes by saying that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And so this was a great experiment that could have failed in the Civil War, and through his determination and skill and resolution, it did not.
Amazing man.
Yes, yes. And Gene, you heard that I was given your book, The Words Lincoln Lived By.
What a collection of gems from Lincoln.
Yes.
How did you compile these? How did you select from all of the things that Lincoln has said, these gems of wisdom, daily wisdom?
Thank you for liking the book. Actually, it's been very successful. I was at Ford's Theater not long ago. They have a bookstore there. There was a big stack of The Words Lincoln Lived By there, and then I went to the Lincoln Library in Illinois, Springfield, and there was a big stack of them there. So it has found a spot, and people like it. What I chose to do was to find quotes from Lincoln that would inspire people. And so I organized them around certain themes like honesty and diversity, and then little commentaries. And by the way, there's one thing that I was careful to do, and that is there are a lot of things out there on the internet that are supposedly said by Lincoln that he never said.
Oh.
And so every one of those quotes in The Words Lincoln Lived By, you can rely on. I'm happy that it's been put to the test. Lincoln scholars have looked at the book, and and every quote there is an authentic quote from Lincoln.
Gene, can you cite some of the quotes that are bogus, that are popular and make the rounds all the time?
Well, there's one that makes the rounds all the time, and it begins, you cannot, in fact, I tried not to memorize it. Give me just a moment, and I'll see if I can read the whole thing. Ask me another question while I look up the bogus quote.
You bet.
Okay.
I think I know the one you're...
did not say.
Yeah, I think I know the one you're referring to. You talked about Lincoln's lack of formal education, 1 year of schooling, and yet he was a brilliant man. Tell us about how he self-taught and self-schooled himself, and how his method of doing that.
Well, in the days that Lincoln grew up on the frontier, they had little schools, usually one-room schools that had one teacher for the whole classroom, and they were sometimes called blab schools, B-L-A-B, blab schools, because the teacher would give them, each of the students, a book to read, or an article, or a magazine, or a newspaper, and tell each of the students to read from that book at the top of their voices. And so whenever they got going, you could hear them for a quarter mile away. So that's the reason they were called blab schools. In my one-man play, I point out that Lincoln continued to read out loud till the day he died. In fact, Billy Herndon, his law partner, said that it almost drove him crazy. But Lincoln felt that reading out loud helped to etch ideas on his mind, and it helped him to spot mistakes, and it helped him to remember. So that's part of it. Also, he was an avid reader. At first, he would read anything he could get his hands on, a general reader, and then eventually he became a diligent student and dug deep. He became fascinated by the law, acquired a copy of Blackstone's commentaries on the law, and taught himself the law with some help from lawyer friends.
I understand he read Newton's work and taught himself science and was able to understand many of those very complex theorems. Was that true?
Yes, he did. He actually did. At one point, his law partner used the word, "Can you prove it?" And Lincoln said, "What do you mean, prove?" And Billy Herndon said, "As in a mathematical proof." Lincoln said, "I don't know anything about that." By the way, by this time, he was well along in his career as a lawyer. So he said, "Give me something to read so that I can understand mathematical proofs." And so he gave him a copy of Euclid, and on the judicial circuit, which he rode every year, at night after everybody else was sleeping, he taught himself geometry and mathematical proofs. And the result was that years later, people would say that when Lincoln spoke and gave a speech, it had all the precision of a mathematical argument, but it still had emotional appeal. By the way, I found the one of the most famous Lincoln quote that Lincoln never said.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
All right, here Lincoln never said this, so let me say at the beginning and end in case somebody happens to tune in the middle. Lincoln never said, "You cannot bring about prosperity by discouraging thrift. You cannot help small men rise by tearing down big men. You cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. You cannot lift the wage earner by pulling down the wage payer." On it goes.
Yeah.
You cannot help the poor man by destroying the rich. Lincoln never said that. It was actually it's been in Ann Landers and the Gettysburg Times, and it's often reproduced, but it was actually written by a minister about 100 years after Lincoln died.
Gene, did any of that really express Lincoln's actual feelings, or would he not have agreed with that if he heard it?
Well, he might have agreed with some of that, but for example, he would not have agreed that you cannot help the poor by taking from the rich, because if you'll think about it, I went to a public school, and so people who had money paid for a public school to help me get an education. So all through society, people who are wealthy by means of taxes create public schools, state universities, do great research. So there's an effort in which taking from the rich, and I'm putting taking in quotes, from the rich does benefit everybody. As a matter of fact, I just was out in California and went to the Huntington, which is in Pasadena, a great collection, museum, gardens, and everything. And it was built by a man by the name of Huntington, of course, that's after whom it's named, who made a fortune with railroads, but Huntington was something of a crook. Not maybe something of a very,
he was a crook.
quite a crook. But I was thinking as I went through the grounds and enjoying it, that in the end, the people had benefited from what the scoundrel did.
Gene, when we come back, I want to hear you talk about the source of Lincoln's extraordinary eloquence. I've heard at least claimed what the source was. Let's hear from you when we come back. We'll be right back, Gene. Stay tuned.